Time is the most expensive commodity in the life of a hunted man. For 13 violent, chaotic months, John Dillinger spent time as if he had an unlimited supply. He bought seconds with high-speed V8 engines, he bought minutes with terrifying displays of firepower, and he bought days with a supernatural ability to vanish into thin air. He was the jackrabbit, a creature of pure instinct whose nervous system was wired to react faster than the law, faster than gravity, faster than logic. He had survived shootouts where the air was so thick with lead it felt solid. He had leaped over bank counters before the tellers could even blink, moving with a kinetic energy that made him seem invincible. He had escaped from prisons that were designed by architects specifically to hold titans, mocking the very concept of containment. But on the suffocating night of July 22, 1934, John Dillinger finally ran out of currency. His account was overdrawn. And the end didn't come because he was outgunned by a superior force. It didn't come because the FBI had finally outsmarted him in a game of chess. It came because of a microscopic, almost invisible glitch in his survival instinct. It came down to a pause. A blink. A hesitation. Tonight, we are investigating the physics of his death. We are breaking down the timeline of his final night, not by the hour, but by the heartbeat. We are looking at the woman walking beside him, a woman in a skirt that looked like blood under the neon lights, and asking the terrifying question, what did she do? Or say, or signal, that caused the fastest gun in the Midwest to freeze. This is the story of the 2-second delay, the tiny, fatal silence that turned a man into a corpse, and a corpse into an eternal legend. To truly understand the weight of that hesitation, you first have to understand the crushing exhaustion that had settled into his bones. By the summer of 1934, John Dillinger was a man being consumed from the inside out. The newspapers called him a rock star, a modern-day Robin Hood who burned mortgage papers and tipped waitresses with $100 bills. The FBI called him a monster, a public enemy who needed to be exterminated. But in reality, he was a ghost haunting his own life. He was hiding in Chicago, a city that was melting under a biblical heatwave. The temperature hovered near 100 degrees for days, turning the asphalt into black sludge that stuck to the soles of shoes, and the air into a suffocating blanket of exhaust fumes, stockyard stench, and stale sweat. People were sleeping in the parks just to catch a breeze, but Dillinger couldn't go to the parks. He was trapped indoors, living in a pressure cooker. He was living under the alias Jimmy Lawrence, pretending to be a bored clerk from the Board of Trade. He wasn't robbing banks anymore, he was trying to survive the legend he had created. Physically, he was a wreck. Just weeks prior, he had undergone crude, painful plastic surgery in a desperate attempt to erase his identity. A shady, underworld doctor had sliced into his face, attempting to remove the famous dimple in his chin, fill out his cheeks, and alter the bridge of his nose. The surgery was a botched, agonizing job. It left him in chronic pain, his face feeling tight, inflamed, and alien, as if he were wearing a mask made of his own skin. He had also tried to burn his fingerprints off with acid, a torture that left his hands raw, sensitive, and scarred. Every time he touched a glass of cold water, or a steering wheel, or the grip of his pistol, he felt a sharp reminder of his trapped existence. He was a man who could no longer feel the world without pain. He was tired. Not just sleepy, but soul-tired. The adrenaline that had fueled his manic spree across Indiana, Ohio, and Wisconsin was gone, replaced by a dull, throbbing paranoia that sat at the base of his skull. But he wasn't alone in this purgatory. And this is where the tragedy begins to take shape. Dillinger had a fatal weakness. It wasn't money. It wasn't fame. It wasn't even the thrill of the chase. It was women. He needed them like he needed oxygen. He needed to be adored, to be touched, to be told that he was still a man and not just a target. In those final, desperate weeks, he had found comfort in the arms of Polly Hamilton. She was a waitress, a simple, fun-loving girl who liked to dance, liked to laugh, and didn't ask too many hard questions about why her boyfriend carried thousands of dollars in cash but never went to work. Polly was his escape valve. With her, he wasn't public enemy number one, he was just Jimmy, a guy who liked baseball, steak, and a cold beer. But lurking behind Polly, in the shadows of their shared apartment, was the true architect of his doom. Her name was Anna Sage. She was Polly's roommate, a Romanian immigrant and a madam running a brothel. She was a woman facing deportation, a woman who looked at John Dillinger and didn't see a lover, a hero, or a villain. She saw a ticket. She saw a boarding pass to stay in America. While Dillinger was buying Polly ice cream and dreaming of a normal life, Anna Sage was negotiating his price per pound with the FBI. She was the cold equation in a romantic tragedy. Sunday, July 22nd. The day started slowly, dragging its feet through the heat. Dillinger slept late, moving through the apartment like a man walking underwater. Witnesses and later reports suggest he was in a good mood, but edgier than usual, perhaps sensing the atmospheric pressure drop that precedes a storm. He spent the afternoon reading the Sunday newspapers, reading about himself. It must be a strange, dissociative psychological torture to read your own obituary while you are sitting in your kitchen eating a ham sandwich. He saw the manhunt intensifying. He saw Hoover's declarations. He saw his friends dead or captured. Around dinner time, seeking a reprieve from the stifling heat of the apartment and the noise in his own head, he told Polly he wanted to go to the movies. It was a simple, suburban desire. The theater had refrigerated air, a luxury in 1934. It was a dark cave where he could sit for 2 hours, anonymous, and not look over his shoulder. They invited Anna Sage to join them. This was the first, and most critical, mistake of the night. Anna Sage had already made the call. She had contacted Melvin Purvis, the FBI's special agent in charge of the Chicago office. The trap was set. The deal was struck. She would wear an orange skirt, a specific shade that would appear blood red under the artificial glare of the marquee lights, to mark him for the slaughter. As the three of them walked down the street toward the Biograph Theater, the dynamic was chillingly cinematic. On one side, Polly Hamilton, holding Dillinger's arm, laughing, completely oblivious, thinking she was on a double date. On the other side, Anna Sage, walking with the heavy heart of Judas, her eyes scanning the street for the G-men she knew were waiting in the shadows. And in the middle, John Dillinger, wearing a straw boater hat and grey flannel trousers, unarmed except for a small .380 automatic tucked in his waistband. He had left the heavy artillery, the Thompson submachine guns, the bulletproof vests, at home. He felt safe. He was with his girls. He was just Jimmy tonight. They arrived at the Biograph Theater on Lincoln Avenue. The movie playing was Manhattan Melodrama, starring Clark Gable. The irony of this choice is so heavy it feels like a scripted plot device from a bad novel, but it is historical fact. The film is about two childhood friends who grow up on opposite sides of the law. One becomes a prosecutor, the other a charismatic gangster named Blackie Gallagher. For 2 hours, John Dillinger sat in the cool, soothing darkness, watching a Hollywood version of his own life projected on the silver screen. He watched Clark Gable play a charming criminal who accepts his fate with a smile. At the end of the movie, Blackie Gallagher is sentenced to death. He walks to the electric chair, refusing to break, refusing to beg, saying goodbye with a wink. What was going through Dillinger's mind in those final moments? Did he see the prophecy? Did he look at Polly in the dark and realize, with a sinking heart, that he could never give her a normal life? Psychologists and historians have suggested that Dillinger might have been in a dissociative state that night. He was watching the movie, but he was also saying goodbye to himself. He was relaxing his guard, letting the fantasy of the film bleed into his reality. In movies, the gangster gets a final speech. In movies, the death is noble. The film lulled him into a false sense of narrative structure. When the credits rolled and the house lights came up, Dillinger blinked against the sudden brightness. He stretched his aching limbs. He adjusted his straw hat. He smiled at Polly. He was happy. For 2 hours, he hadn't been hunted. He walked up the aisle, stepping out of the fantasy and back into the crosshairs of a very real, very brutal world. Outside, the humidity hit them like a physical blow. It was 10:30 p.m. The street was crowded with Chicagoans seeking relief from the heat. People were buying ice cream, walking home, laughing, flirting. But among them, invisible lines of tension were being drawn tight. Melvin Purvis was standing in a doorway a few feet away. He was trembling. He was a nervous wreck of a man, desperate for a win, terrified of botching the operation. J. Edgar Hoover was breathing down his neck. One mistake tonight would cost him his career. He had lit a cigar, the prearranged signal to his agents that Dillinger was the target. But his hand shook so violently that the match went out. He had to light it again. A clumsy, human moment in the midst of a high-stakes assassination. Dillinger, Polly, and Anna Sage stepped onto the sidewalk. They turned left. This is the moment. The clock starts now. Dillinger is walking casually. He is scanning the street, but his famous, criminal radar is jammed. Maybe it was the movie. Maybe it was the heat. Maybe it was the two women flanking him, creating a false bubble of domestic safety that blinded him to the wolves circling the perimeter. As they passed the doorway where Purvis stood, Purvis raised his arm. It was a signal to close the net. Agents emerged from parked cars. Agents stepped out from behind telephone poles. The perimeter was sealing tight. Dillinger didn't notice immediately. He took a few more steps. Then, the atmosphere shifted. We are now at the crux of the legend. The 2-second delay. According to the sterilized, official FBI report, Dillinger realized he was trapped, reached for his gun with intent to kill, and was shot before he could draw. It's a clean story. But witness accounts and forensic trajectory analysis suggest something different. Something more human. Something more tragic. Dillinger sensed the movement. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, that ancient instinct that had kept him alive for so long finally kicked in. He glanced to his left. He saw a man, Agent Cowley, closing in fast. He glanced to his right. Another man. In any other year, in 1933 Dillinger, he would have been moving before the thought even fully formed. He would have shoved the women aside, sprinted into the alley, fired blindly to create chaos, and vanished into the smoke. That was his trademark. Speed, aggression, and chaos. But tonight, on July 22nd, he froze. Why? Why did the jackrabbit stop? There are three prevailing theories that attempt to explain this fatal pause. First, the Polly factor. Dillinger was holding Polly Hamilton's arm. They were linked. If he drew his gun, the agents would open fire immediately. Polly was directly in the line of fire. Did he hesitate to push her away? Did he spend one precious second trying to shield her with his body? Was his love for this innocent girl the glitch that slowed his hand? Was his last act an attempt to save the only person who didn't know who he really was? Second, the betrayal shock. Anna Sage had dropped back slightly. As the agents moved in, she stepped away, isolating him. Dillinger might have caught this movement in his peripheral vision. The realization. The instant, crushing download of the truth, she sold me. The heartbreak of betrayal causes a cognitive delay. The brain struggles to process the emotional trauma before it can process the physical threat. For 1 second, he wasn't a gangster, he was a heartbroken man looking at the woman who had just killed him. And third, suicide by cop. He had just watched Manhattan melodrama. He saw Blackie Gallagher accept death. Dillinger was tired. He was in pain. He knew there was no escape this time. Did he hesitate because, deep down, he didn't want to run anymore? Did he reach for his gun not to kill, but to justify their shots? To force them to end it, whatever the reason, the delay happened. 1001. 1002. His hand went to his waistband. He gripped the .380. But he didn't draw it. He didn't fire. He looked into the eyes of the agents. And in that silence, that terrible, heavy silence, the FBI ended the era. 3 shots rang out. They were not fired in a wild burst of panic. They were execution shots. The first bullet missed, grazing his side. The second bullet entered his back, severed his spinal cord, and tore through his brain, exiting under his right eye. The third bullet hit him as he was already falling. The reaction time of John Dillinger, the man who could outdraw sheriffs and outdrive blockades, had failed him. He was dead before his face hit the pavement. He fell face down in an alley entrance. His hat rolled away. The straw boater, a symbol of a gentleman, lying in the grease, dirt, and blood of a Chicago alley. The women screamed. Polly Hamilton was hysterical, her white shoes splattered with blood, unable to comprehend that her Jimmy was gone. Anna Sage stood silently, her job done, waiting for her reward, a reward she would never truly receive. What happened next is perhaps the most disturbing part of the story, and it highlights the magnitude of the legend that just died. Usually, when there is a shooting, people run away. Gunshots trigger flight. But not this time. This was John Dillinger. As the news rippled through the crowd, they got him. They got Dillinger. The people didn't run away. They ran towards the body. It became a macabre carnival. Men dipped their handkerchiefs in the pool of blood forming around his head. Women dipped the hems of their skirts. They wanted a piece of him. They wanted a talisman. They believed that the blood of John Dillinger held some kind of magic, some kind of power against the crushing poverty of the Depression. The FBI agents had to form a ring around the corpse to keep the souvenir hunters from tearing his clothes apart. The flashing lights of the police cars illuminated a scene that looked less like a crime scene and more like a religious sacrifice. The body was hauled onto a police wagon. It bounced on the metal floor as they drove to the morgue, a final indignity for the man who loved luxury cars. The jackrabbit was finally still. In the autopsy room, the doctors examined the body under harsh lights. They found the scars of his life. The bullet wounds from past escapes. The botched plastic surgery that had mangled his face. The raw, acid-burned fingertips. But they couldn't autopsy the hesitation. They couldn't cut open his brain and find the thought that stopped him. That 2-second delay changed history. If Dillinger had run, if he had taken a hostage, if he had made it into that alley, he might have disappeared for good. He might have fled to Mexico. He might have lived to be an old man, drinking tequila and laughing at J. Edgar Hoover. The FBI might have been disgraced, Hoover might have been fired, and the modern federal police state might never have formed the way it did. Instead, those 2 seconds validated the FBI. It launched J. Edgar Hoover into absolute power for the next 40 years. It turned the G-men into American heroes. It ended the age of the outlaw and began the age of federal surveillance. And what about the women who walked him to his death? Anna Sage, the lady in red, received only half of the reward money she was promised. The FBI betrayed her just as she had betrayed Dillinger. She was deported to Romania anyway, dying alone and obscure. Polly Hamilton, the innocent distraction, was disgraced. She changed her name, dyed her hair, and lived in obscurity, haunted by the memory of the night her boyfriend's head exploded next to her shoulder. John Dillinger was a criminal. He robbed banks. He terrified people. He killed police officers. We shouldn't romanticize the violence. But we can't help but be fascinated by the humanity of his death. He didn't die like a superhero. He didn't die like a villain in a grand shootout. He died like a man who was distracted. He died because for 2 seconds, he forgot who he was. He forgot he was the public enemy. He thought he was just a guy leaving the movies with a girl. That hesitation was the last remnant of his humanity. And it was the thing that killed him. As you walk down Lincoln Avenue in Chicago today, the Biograph Theater is still there. The alley is still there. And if you stand on that spot on a hot July night, and you listen closely, past the traffic and the noise, you might hear it. Not the gunshot, but the silence before it. The 2 seconds where John Dillinger looked at the world, hesitated, and vanished into the dark.